Right now, you are likely experiencing the particular prickly exhaustion of someone who has spent hours staring through a telescope at a dark and distant sky, searching for a sign that your life is moving in the right direction. You feel this restless, hypervigilant pull to constantly scan your environment not for physical threats, but for subtle indicators of whether you are making the correct choices, whether you are falling behind, or whether you have finally misinterpreted the intentions of the people who matter most. You are standing on the wind-battered observatory of your own mind, the cold brass of the lens pressing against your eye, waiting for the constellations of your future to align into a shape that finally makes sense. It is a lonely, hollow way to exist, where you are so occupied with reading the distant, uncaring light of the heavens that you have completely forgotten the feeling of the solid, warm earth beneath your feet. The air in this high place is thin, and the silence that meets your searching is not the peace you were promised, but a cold, echoing reminder of how far you feel from the life you are actually meant to inhabit. You are not broken because you feel this persistent need to interpret the signs, and what you are experiencing is not a failure of your intelligence or a sign that you are fundamentally lost. It is simply the weariness of a stargazer who has been trying to calculate the trajectory of their own destiny through a lens that was never designed to show the path. Tonight, we will not attempt to polish the glass, nor will we try to force the distant lights to give you the clarity you believe you require. We will learn how to lower the telescope, unscrew the heavy brass lens, and finally sit on the garden floor where the ground is tactile, damp, and perfectly real. You do not have to solve the cosmic puzzle of your life tonight. You only have to be the one who steps out of the observatory and arrives, at long last, in the quiet, humble reality of your own body. There is a surprising, quiet paradox at the heart of this reaching. The more desperately you strain your eyes to read the signs in the distance, the more invisible your own life becomes to you. We often believe that peace is something we must earn by accurately predicting the future, or by finally uncovering the hidden code in our past. Yet, Buddhist wisdom suggests that true belonging is never found by looking through a lens. It is found by realizing that the stars are always moving behind the clouds, and they do not require your interpretation to be what they are. Suffering does not come from the stars themselves, but from the exhausting belief that you are responsible for reading them correctly to ensure your safety. If it feels right, take a slow, gentle breath, and as you do, imagine the sensation of stepping away from that cold, metallic tripod. Visualize the transition from the windswept, high-altitude observatory, where everything is distant, sharp, and untouchable, into the sudden, soft dark of a neglected garden at the base of the mountain. You do not have to throw the telescope away. You only have to move into the space where the air is thick with the scent of damp soil and resting leaves. Feel the tension in your face beginning to unclench, and notice how your shoulders drop as you imagine placing your hand upon a pair of worn wooden shears, leaving the heavy brass instrument behind in the quiet air of the upper rooms. You are safe enough to soften. You are safe enough to let the world stop being a code that you are trying to crack. Nothing is required of you here. There are no constellations to map, no omens to decode, and no version of your future that needs to be defended before it has even arrived. You are simply the inhabitant of your own garden, and you are finally arriving at the place where the scanning can stop. Maybe you have felt this way for weeks, or perhaps for seasons, the feeling that your life is a series of distant flickers, and that your own center has been drained by the persistent, jarring expectation that if you just look hard enough, you will see the signal that explains why things have been so difficult. You have been living in a state of perpetual, hyper-stimulated readiness, always expecting the heavens to finally provide the resolution that would allow you to sleep. You think that by watching the horizon for danger or validation, you are ensuring you won't be caught off guard, but you are only missing the sanctuary of the soil. This constant reaching is why your body is braced, why your sleep feels like a restless watch shift, and why you feel so disconnected from your own roots when you try to find rest. But tonight, we will not ask you to calculate the movement of the stars. We will simply discover the dark, quiet earth of your own garden that was always already there, waiting for you to recognize its cool, protective embrace. The mind, in its search for security, desperately wants to stay in the observatory because it mistakes the effort of looking for the process of living. It tells you that your worth is tied to how effectively you can interpret the signs in your environment, and that if you dare to put the lens down, you will lose your way or miss the secret to your own safety. But you are not a stargazer trying to survive the night by predicting the weather. You are the consciousness that perceives the garden, the telescope, and the night sky. You are not a visitor in your own psyche, you are the space that holds the psyche. You are not a mystery that needs to be decoded before you are permitted to let go. Take a slow breath, and as you do, notice how the air moves through your chest without your permission or your planning. Your lungs do not need to be reminded how to expand, they know the rhythm of the living. Your blood does not need to be prompted to circulate, it knows the timing of the pulse. There is a deep ancient intelligence in your biology that knows how to exist, how to repair, and how to surrender to the necessity of rest. You can lean into that wisdom tonight. You can trust that the same force that pulls the tide and opens the flower is also the source of your own capacity to settle. You are not floating through this life on your own, unsupported and adrift. You are held by the reality of the present, and the present is not interested in the frantic, distant scan of your internal telescope. You might be wondering if you are doing this right, if you are actually finding the path down the mountain, or if the habit of looking for signs is still following you too closely into the shadows. Please hear this, there is no right way to be in this space. If your mind wanders back to the high observatory, if you hear the phantom whistle of the wind against the brass lens, or the distant ache of a longing to know what comes next, that is simply the mind doing what it has practiced for years. You do not need to scold it. You do not need to pull it back with force. Just acknowledge the thought, like watching a stray cloud drift across a dim light, and then gently return your awareness to the weight of your body, the presence of this stillness. You are not required to be enlightened tonight. You are not required to be finished. You are only required to be present with whatever you are feeling, even if that feeling is a reluctance to let go or a fear of what the silence contains. Even that fear is just another piece of glass you have been holding, and you are the one who is currently observing the instrument from the safety of the garden. We will sit with these lenses, offering them the soft, dark shade of our attention, but we will not give them the power to occupy the sanctuary. You are the keeper of this evening, and as the keeper, you have the authority to let the observatory remain empty, and to let the garden be just as it is. In a moment, we will step into a story of a painter who became so burdened by his obsession with capturing the stars that he had to learn the difference between being a slave to his visions and the gardener of his own reality. This story may feel significant, not because you have heard it before, but because you have lived the struggle of trying to find peace in a world that never stops moving. It is the beginning of a shift, a way to see the telescope in your own mind and wonder what might happen if you were to simply let the instrument sit on the floor, just for a little while. The darkness is not a void, it is the soft, welcoming floor of your own inner garden, where you can finally be unburdened. And tonight we are letting the noise of your scanning dissolve into the deep, restorative shade of the night. You are doing well. Just be here, in this breath, in this quiet, with nowhere else to go and nothing left to prove. And perhaps this is where the teaching begins to touch your own heart, in the realization that you are not the one reading the stars, but the deep, resonant earth that allows the life to finally grow. In a quiet valley known for its frequent evening mists, there lived a man named Soren who was a painter of constellations. He believed that the order of his life depended on his ability to map the future with absolute precision. Every night, Soren climbed the steep, winding path to a small stone observatory atop the highest hill. Carrying his antique, brass-rimmed telescope, he was convinced that if he could just identify the exact trajectory of the distant stars, he would know when to plant his garden, when to speak, and when to remain silent. He spent his nights shivering in the thin mountain air, his eye pressed against the cold metal lens, scanning the velvet dark for a sign that he was safe, a sign that he was headed toward a life of clarity, and a sign that the looming fears he felt about his own worth were merely temporary blips in a cosmic plan. His hands were often stained with the ink of a journal where he painstakingly recorded the position of every light he could track. He lived in a perpetual state of anticipation, his life suspended in the observatory, while his home at the base of the mountain slowly succumbed to neglect. Weeds grew tall through the floorboards of his porch, and his small garden, once vibrant with medicinal herbs, had withered into a tangle of gray stalks and dry earth. Soren did not notice. He was too busy reading the heavens. He felt that the stars held a secret promise, a destiny that would eventually justify the hours of isolation and the persistent nagging hunger he felt in his chest. One autumn afternoon, a monk from the lower monastery, an elderly man named Koi who was blind, made the arduous climb to the observatory. Koi did not carry a telescope. He carried a small wooden staff and a simple cotton bag. He sat on the stone ledge near the tripod of Soren's telescope and began to hum a low, resonant note that seemed to vibrate against the very foundations of the observatory. Soren, frustrated by the interruption, adjusted the focus of his lens and spoke without turning around. "This is a place for observation," he said, his voice brittle. "It is not a place for song. I am trying to map the future of this valley. I am trying to see what is coming." Koi smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening like the furrows of a well-tilled field. He leaned forward, listening to the sharp, metallic whistle of the wind against the telescope's rim. "I do not need to look at the stars to know the weather of the valley," the monk replied gently. "I can feel the change in the moisture on my skin, and I can hear the way the birds have already retreated to the lower eaves. Tell me, painter, when was the last time you looked at the earth you are standing on? When was the last time you felt the texture of the soil you call home?" Soren looked down at his own hands, then at the sprawling, desolate garden below. He felt a sudden, sharp ache in his throat. "I have no time for the soil," he confessed, his voice barely audible. "The stars are moving too fast. If I look away for even a moment, I might miss the one signal that tells me I have done enough. I might miss the one sign that confirms I am finally on the right path. I am tired of waiting for the future to be written." Koi reached into his bag and pulled out a worn, dust-caked pair of gardening shears. He held them out toward the painter. "These are not for the stars," he said. "These are for the growth that is right in front of you." He reached out and touched Soren's shoulder, a gesture that was surprisingly firm and grounding. "Your heart is not a map, and your life is not a constellation. You are trying to read a story that is being written in your own hands, but you are so focused on the horizon that you have forgotten how to reach out and touch the page." The monk stood up and tapped the brass lens with his staff. "You spend your nights looking for a promise in the distance, but the promise is not in the distance. The promise is in the care you provide for the ground that sustains you. The stars do not care if you succeed or fail, but the garden will always respond to your touch. If you want to know your destiny, stop watching the sky and start tending your own feet." Koi left the shears on the stone floor and began his slow, deliberate descent down the mountain. Soren watched him go, the heavy brass telescope standing between him and the rest of the world. He remained there for a long time, the silence of the mountain pressing in around him. He looked through the lens again, and for the first time, he saw the stars for what they were, silent, distant, and in different points of light. They were not a code, they were not a verdict on his worth. They were just light, moving through the deep, ancient dark, entirely unconcerned with his plans or his fears. Soren felt a wave of profound, weary relief wash over him. He stood up, his joints aching from the cold, and picked up the gardening shears. He walked to the edge of the observatory, looked down at his neglected house, and realized that he had been starving his own life in an attempt to be fed by the heavens. He did not run down the mountain. He walked slowly, feeling the crunch of the gravel under his sandals, feeling the change in the air as he descended into the warmth of the valley. He arrived at his garden, where the weeds had choked out the life he had once loved, and he didn't feel overwhelmed. He just looked at the shears, and then he looked at the first tangled vine. He started with one small section of the soil. He knelt down, his knees pressing into the damp, cool earth, and he began to clear the debris. He did not try to fix the whole garden in one night. He did not look up at the sky to see if he was doing it right. He focused only on the weight of the shears, the feeling of the dry stalks, and the rhythm of his own breathing. Every movement was a small, quiet act of belonging. As he worked, he felt the heavy, rigid structure of his anxiety beginning to soften. He realized that the sign he had been waiting for was not a flicker in the distance, but the simple, tactile satisfaction of tending his own existence. This is the place where your own healing begins. You have been holding your life at a distance, viewing your worth through a lens that magnifies your fears while blurring the ground you stand on. You have been treating your future like a constellation that must be perfectly aligned before you can feel safe enough to sleep. But look at where you are. You are in this room, in this breath, in this life that is already unfolding, and it does not require your constant observation to be valid. You can put the telescope down. You can let the brass rest in the dark. Maybe you have spent your evenings scanning the horizon of your relationships, looking for the one subtle shift in tone that signifies rejection. Maybe you have spent your days tracking the performance of others, hoping to find the exact configuration of effort that will guarantee your success. But all of this scanning is just a way of staying away from the garden of your own heart. It is a way of keeping your pain at a distance where it feels manageable, forgetting that the only way to transform that pain is to bring it back to the soil of your own attention. You are not a ghost haunting your own future. You are a person, right now, with hands that can touch, with feet that can stand, and with a life that is already growing, even in the parts you thought were lost to the weeds. There is a natural, steady intelligence in the way the earth receives the seed. It does not demand that the seed know the constellations to bloom. It only asks for the presence of the gardener. You are the gardener. You are the one who is here to witness the opening of the life, to clear away the distractions, and to hold the space where the healing can take root. You do not need to be a master of the heavens to be a master of your own peace. You only need to be the one who is willing to look down, to reach out, and to finally tend to what is actually there. As you sit in this stillness, let the image of the observatory fade. Imagine you are leaving that cold, high place and finding your way back to your own inner garden. Feel the air becoming warmer, thicker, and more real. You are stepping out of the theater of your anxieties and into the humble, honest reality of your own body. There is no performance required here. There is no test to pass. There is only the breath, the touch of the fabric against your skin, and the quiet, steady rhythm of a life that is ready to be tended. You are moving into a state of deep, grounded awareness where the distant lights no longer dictate your mood. If you feel the old habit of scanning returning the urge to look for danger, the need to decode the signs, gently notice the movement. Name it as the stargazer's reflex, and then let it settle into the earth. It is not wrong to have had that habit. It was an attempt to feel secure. But you are finding a different kind of security now, one that doesn't rely on distant signals, but on the presence of your own awareness in the here and now. And this is where the teaching begins to touch your own heart in the realization that you are not the one who needs to solve the stars, but the one who has the power to return to the earth. You are doing perfectly well, simply by being here, simply by listening, and simply by choosing to stop the endless distance scanning. Are finally home, and the garden is waiting. There is a deep, ancient safety in this descent. Let yourself settle into the soil of the present. Let the distance between you and your life dissolve. There is nowhere else to go, and there is nothing else you need to know tonight. Just breathe into the garden, feel the ground beneath your back, and let the quiet, steady work of being yourself take root in the dark. The brass-rimmed telescope Soren carried represents the architecture of your own inner life, specifically the way you attempt to resolve the ache of being human by scanning the horizon for signs that you have finally earned your security. This story is not telling us that our lives should be empty of direction, nor is it suggesting that we should somehow become indifferent to the goals we carry. It is showing us something much quieter and more essential. The realization that the exhaustion you feel is rarely caused by the stars themselves, but by the frantic, ceaseless labor of trying to map a future that refuses to be constrained by our predictions. When Soren stood with his antique lens pressed to his eye, his suffering was not in the existence of his longing or the difficulty of his path. It was in his desperate, internal mandate to ensure that the heavens provided a justification for his restlessness. That is the first experience of being human encountering the unpredictable, vast, and silent nature of the world. The stars are simply there. They are the raw material of existence, untamed, radiant, and entirely indifferent to our need for a neat account of our sorrows. However, the suffering that kept Soren trapped on that mountain was a secondary layer altogether. It was the layer he constructed as a frantic defense against his own vulnerability. We add this layer because we are terrified that if we stop scanning the horizon, if we stop demanding an explanation for our fears, we will lose the very essence of who we are. We believe that we are the masters of our own destiny, and that if we ever relax our focus on the distant flickers, the chaos of our desires, fears, and obligations will leave us adrift in an unnavigable expanse. We become so busy managing the records of our future that we lose contact with the very thing that makes life habitable, the capacity to inhabit a soil that does not need to be predicted. Buddhist wisdom helps us recognize that we are usually far more exhausted by this secondary labor of deciphering the signs than by the actual realities of our day. What the blind monk Koi showed Soren was that his sanctuary was not a prize to be seen through a lens or a truth to be derived from the light. It was the space that was already present beneath the vigilance. He had been trying to build his life out of constellations, assuming that if the maps were precise enough and the documentation was thorough enough, he could finally find rest. But maps are a porous and brittle material. They do not anchor the soul. They only highlight the hunger of the observer. You do the same when you believe that you must present a perfectly prepared version of yourself to the world, or when you insist on constantly replaying your past to see if you have finally found the logical error that explains your suffering. We think that by shielding our awareness with a wall of interpretations, we are protecting our identity, but we are actually creating a lonely, isolated observatory of our own making. This is what it means to stop adding a second wound to the first. We are so often our own most rigid interpreters, standing at the edge of our own lives with white-knuckled intensity, trying to prevent any unjust feeling or unexplained event from being accepted without a cross-examination. We tell ourselves that if we feel lost, we must have failed to gather enough data. If we feel pain, we must have been careless with our foresight. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be alive. The beauty of a human life is found in its capacity to hold everything: the light, the darkness, the clarity, and the confusion, without needing to categorize or exclude any of it. You do not need to be a perfectly prepared navigator to be worthy of belonging. You are, and always have been, the garden that allows the growth to occur. Consider the energy you spend arguing with the trajectory of your days, or the mental rituals you conduct to ensure you are consistently prepared for the next uncertain event. You are using your current vitality, your present moment awareness, to curate a narrative that no one else is actually requiring you to hold. You are trying to live in a perpetual state of deduction, shielding yourself from the very life you are meant to inhabit. When you catch yourself doing this, try to see it as the act of a traveler who is so frightened of the ground that they refuse to realize the earth is already solid. You are so busy mourning the loss of a perfectly predictable future that you are failing to notice the warmth of the sun falling across your own hands. This is not about being reckless or careless with your plans. It is about understanding that the quality of your presence depends not on the accuracy of your telescope, but on your willingness to be here, in the midst of your own garden. Without the armor of the old maps, the mind, in its search for security, desperately wants the world to be composed of quiet, logical sequences. It thinks that if it can just manage the interpretation, it will finally be safe from the pain of being surprised or the pain of being overwhelmed. But true resilience is not a product of prediction. It is a product of inclusion. We connect with ourselves and others, not because we have successfully solved the mystery, but because we are real enough to host the whole experience. When we allow ourselves to acknowledge that the night is vast, even if we are resting on the earth, we invite our spirits to move into the new air. We break the cycle of exhaustion by daring to exist in the space where the lens has been set aside. You do not need to be a catalog of reasons to be present. You only need to be the person who is currently sitting, breathing, and looking out from the depth of your own reality. This teaching is meant to be a release from the exhausting work of maintaining your own defenses. You have been holding the heavy brass rims of your own expectations, trying to prevent any part of your story that feels too raw or too painful from being accepted as it is. And it is a labor that yields nothing but a thinner, more brittle sense of self. Your soul is not a map that needs to be finished. It is the sanctuary where the life occurs. When you look at your own restlessness with compassion, you are not condoning your suffering, and you are not pretending the road was easy. You are simply choosing to honor the totality of your own life, including the moments that didn't go according to the pattern. As you reflect on this, notice where the tension sits in your body. Does it gather in the tightness of your eyes when you think of the signs you feel you must monitor to keep yourself safe? Does it sink into your shoulders like a heavy, unseen weight of responsibility for things you cannot change? This is the physical sign that you are still trying to hold the telescope against the wind. You are bracing yourself against the reality of your own human experience. If it feels right, take a slow, deep breath and consciously let the muscles release. You are not performing for a constellation tonight. You are not holding the lens for a judge. You are simply breathing in the quiet of this room, acknowledging that the experiences you have lived, even if they were difficult, even if they were filled with the echoes of your own scanning, have brought you to this place. And this place is safe. You have done nothing wrong by being a person who has lived, learned, and occasionally felt the burden of wanting more predictability than the world was willing to provide. The capacity to witness your own mind with kindness is the most radical form of discipline you will ever practice. It is not an invitation to be dismissive or to ignore your own needs. It is an invitation to be honest. When you are not busy hiding your inner garden from yourself, you are free to feel the warmth of your own center. When you are not busy managing the record of your forecasts, you are free to hear the sound of the wind or the rhythm of your own pulse. You are free to take your hand off the brass and see the simplicity of the truth rather than the complexity of the interpretation. This is the difference between a life lived in fear of being discovered as incomplete and a life lived in the comfort of being at home. You do not have to reach any particular conclusion about your identity tonight. You do not need to label your year as successful or broken. You only need to notice the space that is open before you, the space where the rest is calling. And that space is wide, and it is welcoming, and it is entirely unburdened by the expectations that governed your afternoon. You are not the map, and you are not the observer in the observatory. You are the one who is beneath it all, and you are the one who has the freedom to decide that. For now, it is safe to let the telescope rest if you do not feel like looking through it anymore. This is the profound, quiet power of the present moment. It is always a sanctuary, even when the observatory is cluttered with the notes of the day. If you feel the urge to tighten your grip, if you feel the old, familiar rhythm of the painter pulling at your awareness, simply name it. Just say, "I am trying to scan for signs again." Say it with gentleness, as if you were speaking to a companion who is afraid to be seen without their maps. You do not need to fight the doubt, and you do not need to agree with the requirement to remain vigilant. You can just notice the urge, hold it in your awareness, and know that the garden is already real, and the evening is as it needs to be. You are moving into a deeper, slower rhythm now, one where the urgency of the interpretations begins to fade into the steady, predictable heartbeat of the present. There is nowhere else to be, and there is no standard you must meet before you are permitted to let the lens go. You are doing perfectly well, simply by being here, simply by listening, and simply by choosing to stop fighting the weight of your own scanning. And perhaps this is where the teaching begins to touch your own heart, in the quiet realization that you are not the one who needs to read the heavens, but the one who has the power to return to the earth, and that this earth has been here all along, waiting for you to walk down the path and finally truly sit. If it feels right, allow your eyelids to settle into a soft, heavy stillness, and let the room around you fade into the background of your awareness. We are not here to map the night sky or to solve the trajectory of your tomorrow. We are here to sit with the garden you have been neglecting, to breathe into the spaces where the weeds of worry have grown tall, and to finally feel the solid, damp earth beneath your palms. You do not need to be a navigator tonight. You do not need to be a keeper of the light or a reader of the stars. You only need to be the person who is finally willing to put down the brass lens, unscrew the heavy metal parts, and rest in the honest, tactile quiet of your own body. Take a slow, gentle breath, and as you do, imagine the sensation of unscrewing that cold, metallic telescope from its tripod. Feel the weight of the brass in your hands. It is heavy, intricate, and cold, a symbol of all the times you have strained your eyes to see a future that hasn't arrived. As you exhale, imagine setting that instrument down on the stone floor of the observatory. You are not throwing it away, you are simply allowing it to rest. You are stepping back from the ledge, away from the wind-whipped heights, and letting your awareness drift down toward the garden you have left untended. Feel your shoulders broaden and relax, the tension that has been held in your upper back beginning to thaw, as if the cold mountain air is being replaced by the warm, still atmosphere of a sheltered valley. Observe the space between your thoughts, not as a gap to be filled, but as the soil in which your own peace must eventually grow. Perhaps a thought arises, whispering a list of things you have not yet finished, or a concern about how you will appear to others tomorrow. When you notice this movement, you do not need to follow it. You do not need to pick up the telescope and adjust the focus. Simply acknowledge the arrival of the concern. Name it gently as the stargazer's urge, and visualize yourself gently placing it onto the ground of your garden, like a seed that has not yet been planted. You are not suppressing the worry, you are simply changing its location. You are moving it from the distant, ungraspable heavens to the immediate, manageable soil of your own attention. Notice the physical sensation of that release. When you stop trying to watch the stars, where does your energy go? It returns to your center. It returns to the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of your chest. Feel the warmth in your hands as you rest them on your own body. This warmth is the most reliable sign you will ever find. It is the proof that you are here, that you are real, and that you are living in a world that is far more tactile than any map could ever describe. If a feeling of restlessness persists, a prickle of anxiety about what happens if you don't keep watching, let that feeling be seen. You might imagine that sensation as a dry, brittle stalk in your garden. It is a part of the landscape, and it doesn't need to be fought. It only needs to be acknowledged. You can sit with it, breathe into the space around it, and notice how it loses its sharp, urgent edge when you stop trying to use it as a compass. Even noticing that you are restless is an act of profound wisdom, that small moment of recognition where you realize, I am searching for signs again, is the very moment the path begins to clear. It is the moment you stop being the one who is watched by the heavens and start being the one who tends to the earth. There is no need for catharsis, and there is no need for a sudden, dramatic breakthrough. The garden does not grow because you demand it to. It grows because you provide the space, the breath, and the steady, quiet patience of your presence. You are doing perfectly well, simply by being the witness to your own garden tonight. If it feels right, you might visualize yourself taking the worn wooden shears that the monk left for you. You don't need to do any heavy labor right now. The work of the night is not production, but permission. Imagine yourself walking through the rows of your own inner garden, noticing the tangled vines of old regrets or the overgrown brambles of future fears. You don't have to clear them all. You only need to touch one vine, recognize its presence, and breathe. Feel the weight of the tool in your hand. It is made of simple wood and steel, humble and useful. It connects you to the ground. Let your hand rest on the handle, feeling the texture of the grain. And notice how that simple connection to a physical object pulls your awareness out of the clouds and down into the reality of the room. If you find yourself drifting back to the observatory, back to the desire to know, to predict, to solve, or to defend, that is perfectly acceptable. The mind is a traveler who has walked this high, cold path for a long time. It does not know how to stop immediately. You can treat that desire with the same kindness you would show a tired child who is afraid of the dark. You don't need to scold the traveler. You don't need to force them to sit in the garden before they are ready. You can just notice the urge, acknowledge the fear that drives it, and then gently turn your head back toward the soil. Breathe, soften, and return. The garden is patient. The earth is waiting. It is not going anywhere. Feel the support of the bed beneath you, the way the floor of your room is holding the structure of your life, even while you are resting. You are not suspended in the heavens, you are anchored to the world. And being anchored is not a weakness, it is the very foundation of your safety. You can let the telescope go. You can let the constellations move without your tracking. You can let the night be exactly as it is, without your permission or your analysis. Observe the way your breath becomes quieter, the way the rhythm of your heart slows to match the stillness of the room. This is the natural outcome of lowering the lens. This is what happens when you stop trying to see the invisible and start honoring the immediate. You are becoming a person of the earth, a person of the garden, a person who understands that the only destiny that matters is the one you are tending to right now. In this breath, in this moment of quiet, in this safe, dark, and perfectly sufficient space. If you are feeling a lingering heaviness, do not be afraid. The soil of the garden is supposed to be heavy. That is where the life is. That is where the roots find their purchase. You don't need to lighten your heart by force. You only need to ground it in the truth of your own experience. Whatever you are carrying, let it rest in the garden. Let it soak into the earth. The earth is vast enough to hold your history, your confusion, and your hope, and it will turn all of it into the very substance that sustains your future. You are doing perfectly well, and the work of the night is almost done. Just keep breathing, keep sensing the ground, and keep letting go of the distant light. The stars will continue their dance without you, and you at last are free to rest in the sanctuary of your own life. In the high, desolate reaches of the northern mountains, where the winter storms howl with a ferocity that can shatter glass, there lived a young monk named Koi. Koi had spent many years in his monastery, believing that the way to true peace was to create a mind as still as a frozen pond. He was obsessed with the practice of silence, viewing every sound in his monastery as a failure of his own concentration. If a floorboard creaked, if a fellow monk coughed during meditation, or if the wind whistled through the eaves, Koi would tighten his jaw, clench his hands, and brace himself against the intrusion. He lived his days in a state of constant, low-level warfare against his own environment, certain that if he could just keep the world quiet enough, he would finally be able to touch the face of enlightenment. His teacher was an elderly monk who lived in a small remote cabin near an echoing ancient well. This well was notorious in the valley because it didn't just hold water, it held sound. Because of the unique shape of the stone masonry, even the softest whisper dropped into the well would return to the speaker, amplified and distorted moments later. For years, the young monk had avoided this well, convinced that it was a place of distraction. But one evening, when the mountain air was particularly fierce and the wind was wailing through the valley, the teacher called Koi to the well. He handed the young man a heavy, smooth stone and pointed toward the dark, yawning mouth of the water source. "Drop the stone," the teacher said, and listened to the echo. Koi hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached toward the opening. He knew that the sound would return to him, and he had spent his life training himself to despise unwanted noise. He dropped the stone. A hollow, heavy thud resounded deep in the earth, and a few moments later the echo returned, sharp and jarring, bouncing off the damp walls and piercing the stillness of the mountain air. He instinctively flinched, his shoulders pulling toward his ears, his teeth grinding together as the sound hit him. He reached out as if to catch the echo in the air, trying to push it back into the darkness. The teacher did not move. He simply watched the young monk struggle. Again he said, "Drop another." Koi dropped a second stone, and then a third. Each time the echo returned, and each time Koi braced himself, fighting the sound, trying to suppress the ripple it caused in his composure. His face was flushed with the exertion of his resistance. He felt the familiar, burning frustration of the merchant, the same irritation he felt when the monastery was not perfectly silent. He turned to his teacher, his voice strained. "Master, why must I endure this? The echo is a poison to my meditation. It is a disturbance that does not belong in the silence of the mountain." The old man reached down and picked up a handful of dry needles from a pine tree. He didn't throw them into the well. He simply held them in his palm and let them fall into the empty space between them. The needles fluttered to the ground, landing with a sound so faint it was barely audible. Then he looked at Koi. You are fighting the echo because you believe you are the owner of the silence, he said softly. But the well does not belong to you, and the sound does not belong to the well. The echo is not a poison, it is a law of the mountain. It returns because the well is deep, and because the stone has weight. The only reason the echo feels like a failure to you is because you have convinced yourself that your meditation must be a place where nothing ever happens. Koi stood by the well, his heart hammering against his ribs. The realization hit him with the weight of the stone he had just dropped. He had been so focused on the return of the sound that he had completely ignored the depth of the well. He had been so intent on keeping his mind frozen that he had missed the fact that a living mind, like a deep well, is designed to hold everything: the noise, the echo, the wind, and the silence. He looked down into the black water. He realized that the echo was not a reflection of his inadequacy. It was a testament to the depth of the place where he lived. He picked up one final stone. This time, he didn't tense his jaw. He didn't brace his shoulders. He didn't prepare to fight the return of the sound. He held the stone for a moment, feeling its cool, rough surface, and then he let it go. He watched it fall. He heard the thud, and when the echo came back, louder and sharper than before, Koi simply listened. He didn't follow the sound with his mind. He didn't name it as a disturbance. He didn't label it as a failure. He just let the sound be a sound, and let the space be a space. He breathed into the echo, feeling it move through his body like a wave moving through the ocean. And then he watched as it faded back into the absolute quiet of the night. A strange, subtle shift occurred in that moment. Koi did not become a saint. He did not gain the power to turn the world into a perfectly silent void. But he did stop holding his breath. He stopped treating the sounds of the world as personal attacks on his own character. When he returned to the monastery the next day, the floorboards still creaked, the other monks still coughed, the wind still wailed. But Koi no longer met these sounds with a clenched fist. He met them with the depth of the well. He found that when he stopped fighting the echo lost its power to disrupt him. It became just one more part of the landscape, like the trees, the snow, or the stars. The transformation was small, almost invisible to anyone watching from the outside. He still practiced silence, but it was no longer a forced silence. It was a spacious, inclusive silence that could hold 1,000 noises without breaking. He learned that the deepest form of peace isn't found by escaping the noise, but by being deep enough to hold it. And whenever he felt the familiar urge to brace himself against the world, he would simply pause, remember the depth of the well, and breathe until the tension in his hands finally dissolved. He was no longer the merchant guarding the gate, he was the well, and the well did not fear the sound. This shift in how you relate to your own suffering is the true work of the evening. You have spent so long bracing yourself against the echoes of your own thoughts, treating every internal sound like an intruder that must be evicted. You have turned your mind into a battlefield, constantly monitoring for the slightest hint of noise so you can strike it down with your own self-judgment. But what if you were to treat yourself not as a guard of a crumbling fort, but as the deep well that holds the mountain? What if the anxiety, the overthinking, and the persistent nagging memories are just stones you are dropping into the depth of your own awareness? The stones have weight. Yes, they make a sound when they hit the bottom, but they do not change the nature of the water. You are the depth. You are the space that allows the sound to be heard, and then inevitably allows it to fade. You do not need to be afraid of the echo. You do not need to be afraid of the noise. You only need to remember that you are the space that holds it all. As you lie here tonight, allow your own internal echoes to resonate without your interference. If a memory of a conflict arises, let it sound. If a worry about tomorrow echoes through your chest, let it sound. You do not need to catch the echo. You do not need to push it back. You can just sit with the depth, knowing that you are vast enough and quiet enough to be the sanctuary for every single thing that passes through you. The transformation you are seeking is not a destination where no thoughts ever arise. It is the soft, gentle realization that you are the one observing the thoughts. You are the one who is deep and steady and ancient. When you feel the familiar tension in your shoulders, use that as a reminder to deepen your own inner architecture. Drop the stone, listen to the sound, and then let it go. You are doing perfectly well. You are learning to inhabit the depth of your own being, and in that depth there is no noise that can truly harm you. There is only the silence, the echo, and the vast, peaceful potential of the well. And in this vastness, you are finally free to stop defending your own mind and start resting in the sanctuary you have been carrying within you all along. When we look closely at the hidden machinery of your exhaustion, it becomes clear that the weight you carry is rarely the weight of the present moment. The deep structural fatigue you feel in your bones is not caused by the natural unfolding of your life, but by the relentless, invisible labor of trying to control it. You have spent years believing that if you can just exert enough mental pressure, if you can just calibrate the lenses of your internal telescope with perfect precision, you can anticipate every shift in the weather and protect yourself from being hurt. We treat our own awareness like a fragile experiment that must be constantly defended from uncertainty. You stand in the freezing altitude of the observatory, convinced that your safety depends entirely on your ability to predict the movement of every distant light. This deep-seated need for certainty manifests as a quiet, relentless friction within your spirit. You may find yourself lying in the dark, turning the heavy brass dials of your mind backward, pointing your focus at the constellations of your past. You replay old conversations, dissecting every word and every pause, searching for the exact moment you might have made a mistake, as if analyzing the history will somehow change its shape, or perhaps you swing the lens forcefully forward, rehearsing the days to come, constructing elaborate mental blueprints for scenarios that may never arrive. You build defenses for storms that are not even gathering, all in an effort to ensure you are never caught unprepared. We call this process preparation, and we tell ourselves it is a form of wisdom. But if we observe it closely, we can feel the high, anxious cost of this vigilance. It is fear masquerading as protection. It is the mind trying to build a fortress out of predictions, unaware that the very act of constant scanning is what keeps us isolated from the fluid, tactile beauty of the present. In the language of the heart, Buddhist wisdom draws a vital distinction between the initial impact of life and the subsequent stories we tell ourselves about that impact. One of the great insights of the tradition points to the reality of the two arrows. The first arrow represents the pain that life brings to your garden without your consent. It is the sudden frost that wilts a hope, the project that falls short despite your best intentions, the word that stings, or the unexpected shift in a relationship you cherished. This first pain is an inevitable condition of being a human being in an impermanent world. It is the raw material of existence, untamed and unpredictable. We cannot control where the first arrow lands, and it is natural, soft, and entirely appropriate to grieve the wound it leaves behind in the soil. But the mind, in its desperate attempt to avoid feeling vulnerable, almost immediately fires a second arrow into the very same wound. This second arrow is our resistance. It is the frantic sprint back up the mountain to the observatory, where we grab the telescope and demand to know why we failed to see the frost coming. It is the inner voice that transforms a temporary misfortune into a permanent statement about our core value, whispering that because a single crop failed, the entire landscape of your life must be fundamentally flawed. We add heavy layers of shame, regret, and anxiety to the original hurt, believing somehow that if we punish ourselves severely enough, we can force the heavens to become predictable. We turn a passing wave of sadness into a permanent identity, wrapping ourselves so tightly in the cold metal of our internal narrative that we forget who we are without the burden of our mapping. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal when you realize that you have the capacity to stop feeding that secondary struggle. You may not be able to erase the events of your day, and you may not be able to prevent the clouds from shifting over your garden, but you can choose to step away from the brass lens tonight. You can notice the moment your mind begins to build an entire identity out of a single mistake, and you can gently, compassionately choose to stay on the ground. Peace is not a state where the sky is permanently clear, nor is it a sanctuary where no challenging weather ever occurs. True peace is a completely different relationship with that difficulty. It is the willingness to stand in the garden while the rain falls, recognizing that the storm is simply the natural rhythm of the earth, not a judgment on the quality of your soul. When you look closely at your own habit of overthinking, you can see that it is often an attempt to fix the self through the application of shame. We believe that if we keep our failures vividly alive in the center of the lens, we will remain humble and protected from future arrogance. We use self-criticism like a harsh winter wind, hoping it will scour away our imperfections. But shame is a freezing, static thing. It behaves like ice over the soil, hardening the ground until nothing new can possibly grow. It convinces us that we are the mistake itself, rather than the person who experienced the mistake. Buddhist wisdom invites us to look at our past with the soft, discerning eye of awareness, rather than the harsh glare of judgment. Awareness sees the withered leaves in the garden and simply notes their existence. It does not draft a long, condemning thesis on the worthlessness of the gardener. This shift in perspective requires us to abandon the constant search for approval from a world that is itself completely unstable. We scan the faces of others, we check our digital connections, and we measure our achievements against distant stars, always seeking a final, definitive sign that we have done enough to earn our right to exist. We are like an astronomer who refuses to eat or sleep until the universe explicitly confirms the accuracy of their charts. But the validation we are seeking is an impermanent cloud, constantly changing shape with the passing opinions of the day. The only sanctuary that truly matters is the one you cultivate within your own awareness, the space where you allow your own tired hands to rest in the dirt without needing a cosmic guarantee to justify the stillness. What happens when you stop treating every anxious thought as an absolute prophecy and begin to see it simply as a passing shadow over the grass? You begin to realize that the mind is a vast, open landscape capable of experiencing many different kinds of weather without being destroyed by any of them. You can feel the anxiety rise. You can notice the familiar urge to run to the observatory and check the trajectory of tomorrow. And instead of immediately reaching for the lens, you can simply take a slow, deep breath. You can say to yourself, with immense gentleness, "This is the second arrow. I do not have to fire it tonight." In that single moment of recognition, the grip of the old pattern begins to soften. You are no longer the anxious watcher trapped in the predictable tragedy of your own worries. You are the awareness that is observing the urge, steady, unmoving, and perfectly safe in the dark. You do not need to hate yourself for the long hours you have spent trying to predict the unpredictable. The habit of resistance was built out of a genuine desire to keep your heart from being broken. It was an act of survival, a clumsy form of self-love that tried to protect you by keeping you vigilant. But tonight, you can thank that old vigilance for its service and gently inform it that it is safe to rest. The garden is secure, the soil is quiet, and the unfolding of tomorrow does not require your midnight calculations to be valid. You are learning to trust the natural resilience of your own roots, the inherent strength of a spirit that has survived every single storm it has ever faced, even the ones that felt as though they would tear the roof from the observatory. Let the clarity of this understanding settle into the deeper, slower rhythms of your body. Feel the way your breath moves in and out of your lungs, a gentle, rhythmic proof that life is continuing to sustain you without any active management from your intellect. You do not have to hold the sky up tonight. You do not have to prove your competence. You do not have to validate your history. And you do not have to resolve the great mysteries of your purpose before you are permitted to let your eyes close. You are a living presence, beautiful in your transitions, whole in your imperfections, and completely entitled to the quiet that is currently rising to meet you. The telescope is set aside, the need to know is dissolving, and you are finally entering the space where the unknown is not a threat, but a soft, dark blanket under which you can safely and deeply rest. The transition from the stillness of the observatory into the rapid, relentless rhythm of your everyday life is where the true narrative of your healing is actually written. It is easy to find a sense of clarity when you are listening to the story of a painter who finally stopped scanning the heavens. But when you are caught in the middle of a Tuesday, staring at a screen while waiting for a response that refuses to arrive, the heavy brass of your own expectations often feels far more burdensome than it did in the quiet of the mountain. You might find yourself checking your phone for some kind of external reassurance, hoping that a single notification will settle the flutter in your chest and confirm that you are worthy, that you are remembered, that you are still a vital part of the world. When the reply does not come, you may feel your mind immediately beginning to reach for the telescope, trying to adjust the focus, trying to find an explanation for the silence that makes you feel small or forgotten. In those moments of modern solitude, you are trying to force a shape onto the day that it refuses to take. Instead of following the thread of that panic, try taking one breath before you reach for the screen again, just one. That breath is not a solution to the silence, but it is a way of reclaiming your own agency. It is an act of recognizing that you can exist in the uncertainty without immediately needing to fill it with a defensive, weary performance of your own adequacy. Maybe you find yourself lying awake long after the house has gone quiet, replaying a conversation where you felt clumsy, exposed, or misunderstood. You are back in that moment, mentally reenacting your words, trying to imagine how you could have been sharper, more composed, or more impressive. You are attempting to fight a ghost from days ago, trying to change the trajectory of an event that has already settled into the earth. This is the habit of the stargazer who fears the night. You believe that if you study the error long enough, you will prevent it from ever happening again. But this is the second arrow, the injury you inflict upon your own peace to make up for the limitation that already occurred. When you catch yourself doing this, try to visualize that memory not as a stain on your identity, but as a single flicker in the dark that has already passed. It happened. It is part of the landscape. You do not need to pull it out of the past and press it back into your current life to justify your worth. You do not need to discard the entire experience. You can simply acknowledge that the flicker occurred. Forgive yourself for being a person who is still learning to navigate the winds of time. And let your focus return to the texture of your sheets, the weight of your body, and the fact that you are safe in this room right now. There is often a pervasive pressure to feel like you are behind in life, that others have mastered the art of being, while yours remains a series of revisions and crossed-out lines. You might feel the burden of performing your stability, of keeping your maps tight even when you are feeling hollow or fragile. You offer help to others, you smile through the fatigue, you maintain the appearance of a master of your own destiny. But inside, you feel the strain of holding up a narrative that you are terrified will be judged as empty. This is the exhaustion of the traveler who has become a statue. It is the effort of maintaining a version of yourself that is meant for the high observatory, at the expense of the person who just needs to feel the cool, damp shadow of their own garden. You do not have to be the repository of every achievement. You are allowed to be the space around the experience. You are allowed to admit that you are tired, to say I do not have the map figured out yet, or to simply step away from the scanning for an evening. Your worth is not a transaction. It is not something you have to earn through your output, your charm, or the perfection of your composure. It is inherent, and it is here, whether you are productive or whether you are still. Consider the times you feel the sudden, sharp need to control a relationship, to force an outcome because you are terrified of losing the connection or being revealed as less than. You might find yourself over-explaining, apologizing for your presence, or checking in too often, all in an effort to keep the walls of the relationship from crumbling under the pressure of your own neediness. But when you pull a boundary too tight, you don't strengthen the connection, you make it brittle. You make it prone to snapping under the pressure of your own anxiety. Real connection is found in the spaces where there is no tension. It is found when you can allow the other person to be who they are, without needing them to fulfill a role in your internal ledger of security. You can care deeply without gripping the brass lens so hard your hands bleed. You can offer love without making it a currency of validation. This requires a specific kind of courage. The courage to risk being seen without the display of your defenses, and the courage to trust that you are enough, even if the other person does not mirror your efforts exactly as you expected. You may also struggle with the feeling that you have not earned your rest, that if you aren't constantly solving, analyzing, or preparing for the next demand, you are being irresponsible. You might feel guilty for sitting in a quiet room without a task, or for closing your eyes before the day is perfectly in order. This is the belief that rest is a reward to be unlocked by your productivity, rather than a fundamental necessity of the living, breathing human form. You do not have to earn the right to exist. You do not have to prove your value to the world before you are allowed to close your eyes. When that guilt arises, treat it like a dry, dusty leaf that has blown into your garden. Acknowledge that the guilt is a habit, a voice from the observatory that equates survival with endless movement. You can choose to set it down. You can choose to rest simply because you are here. And the body, like the soil of the garden itself, requires seasons of stillness to remain vibrant. It is helpful to remember that mindfulness is not an escape from these modern pressures. It is a way to inhabit them differently. A breath before you answer an email is not a waste of time. It is a form of wisdom that protects the integrity of your own spirit. Choosing not to engage in a toxic spiral of comparison when you see someone else's highlight reel on a screen is not weakness, it is a profound act of self-discipline. You are creating a boundary between the world's constant noise and your own internal sanctuary. Every time you consciously return to the present, you are choosing to walk the path without trying to turn it into a battlefield. You are saying, I will meet the world when it arrives, but for now I am here in my own skin, and that is sufficient. Even in the smallest moments, the way you hold a cup of tea, the way you listen to the sound of the rain, the way you walk through a doorway, you can practice this. You do not need to leave your life to find the garden. The garden is the attention you bring to these moments. When you feel the familiar pull to worry, pause and ask yourself, is this worry helping me? Is it solving anything? Or is it just the rhythm of the traveler, scanning the horizon for storms that haven't arrived? If it is just the scanning, then let it sit. You do not have to carry the burden of the telescope tonight. You can step away, you can soften your jaw, and you can let the silence of the room be your guide. This does not mean the difficulties of your life will vanish. The responsibilities will still be there. The world will still be complex, and the path will remain demanding. But you will meet these things with a different spirit. You will meet them as someone who is rooted, someone who knows that their identity is not tied to the perfection of the charts they can produce. You will meet them with the quiet, steady strength of a gardener who understands that the beauty of life is in the seasons, the rain, and the willingness to let the harvest arrive in its own time. You are learning that you are not the builder of your own destiny. You are the one who gets to participate in the flow for a brief, precious span of time. And that is enough. It is more than enough. Stay with this feeling of lightness. The next moments are yours to simply inhabit, without trying to capture them or wall them into something they are not yet. You are doing perfectly well, and the night is finally holding you with a gentleness you are ready to receive. The mountain is behind you, the lens is set aside, and you are finally entering the space where the noise is allowed to dissolve, unheeded, unmanaged, and perfectly at peace in the dark. The antique brass of the telescope is cold now, left behind in the quiet, shadowed observatory of your thoughts. While you have safely descended into the rich, damp earth of your own garden, you do not need to carry the weight of the horizon any longer. The sky, with its vast and indifferent constellations, will continue to turn, but it no longer demands that you be its interpreter or its judge. You have put down the lens, you have set aside the maps, and you have finally allowed yourself to feel the solid, steady ground beneath your back. This room, this moment, and this breath are enough. The garden of your life does not ask you to scan the heavens for validation. It only asks for your presence, your patience, and your willingness to let the seeds of this day settle into the dark, nourishing soil of the night. Feel the softness of the air as it moves through the room, a gentle tide that washes away the need to solve, to fix, or to foresee. Your limbs are growing heavy, sinking into the mattress like roots finding their deepest purchase in the cool, still earth. There is a profound, quiet safety in this release, a realization that the ground was always there, waiting to hold you, even when your mind was high above, lost in the icy air of the mountain. The work of being a surveyor of your own future is finished for tonight. You are not a watcher of lights, but a tenant of the living earth, and the earth requires nothing of you but your rest. Feel the tension draining from your brow, the furrow of the stargazer smoothing into the calm, untroubled brow of one who has finally come home. Your jaw is unhinged, your tongue is resting in the cradle of your mouth, and your heart is beating with the slow, deliberate rhythm of the soil. This is the truth of your existence, not the frantic calculations of the observatory, but the quiet, rhythmic pulse of the life that is breathing itself without your permission or your worry. Let the darkness of the room be a soft velvet cloak. Let the silence of the night be the sanctuary you have sought in the distant stars. You are anchored here, rooted and real, and there is no distance left to cross. Each breath is a slow, deepening invitation to let go of the last remnants of the brass lens. As you inhale, imagine the coolness of the garden air filling your lungs. And as you exhale, imagine the heat and the friction of your mental scanning dissolving into the dark. You are becoming as still as a dormant bulb in winter, waiting for the natural, unforced unfolding of the morning. There is no need to rush the harvest, and there is no need to fear the winter. The seasons will turn, the light will return, and you will be there ready to tend the earth. But for now, you are simply the life that rests. You are the garden, you are the soil, and you are the quiet, dark space where everything is allowed to be exactly as it is, without being named, without being mapped, and without being solved. The brass is cold and silent, forgotten on the mountain ledge, while you are warm, heavy, and sinking deeper into the restorative, dreamless calm of the world. There is a deep, ancient wisdom in this surrender. You are not disappearing into the void, you are returning to the source of your own strength. The mind that worries, the mind that scans, the mind that clings to the telescope, all of these are just visitors, passing clouds in the vast open sky of your awareness. You are the sky, you are the depth that holds the clouds, and you are the stillness that allows the night to be so remarkably, beautifully quiet. Nothing is broken, nothing is missing, nothing needs to be fixed before you can close your eyes and drift into the soft, velvet dark. You are simply a traveler who has reached the end of the long road, and the road has led you at last to the gate of your own home. Let the door close behind you. Let the heavy brass instruments fall away. Let the maps dissolve like smoke in the moonlight. There is nothing left to observe, and there is nowhere left to reach. The garden is still. The night is deep. The earth is holding you, firm and patient, in the palm of its ancient hand. You can stop holding your breath. You can stop guarding the horizon. You can stop the frantic, lonely work of being the one who must foresee the storm. The storm is only weather, and the weather is only a dance, and the dance is not your responsibility. You are free to let the world unfold without your interference. You are free to let the night take you into its cool, protective center, where the only thing that matters is the rhythm of your own quiet heart. Drift down, deeper still, into the dark, rich loam of this peace. The telescope is gone. The observatory is silent. You are finally completely and deeply at home in your own stillness. If the future you were trying so hard to map is already growing in the silence you were trying so hard to avoid, what would happen if you simply let the night hold you until you were ready to bloom?